Hi, welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of June. June was a pretty busy month for us with lots of traveling, and so as a result, I got lots of audiobooking in on our road tripping. So I ended up with 13 books by the end of the month, which is a lot for me. But again, several of these were audiobooks that we were listening to on our trip. June was also the first full month of Summer Book Bingo. So if you haven't seen my Summer Book Bingo board and heard about the associated giveaway that's going on with that, I will go ahead and link my announcement video so you can go check that out. But essentially, it's just a really fun bingo board with some open-ended prompts on it, and you can just plug in books that you've already read in June for it. It lasts the entire summer, so it's not too late for you to join, certainly. I'll be sharing with you as I'm talking about each book where it fits on my bingo board, what prompt I used it for, if I did use it for a prompt. And then at the very end, after I've talked about all the books, I'll give you an updated graphic on what my board looks like. I am going to divide this wrap up into genres, so that way if there's something you're more interested in or something you're less interested in, you can skip to those things. Let's start out with classics. So I read 3 classics this month, and the first one I'm going to talk about is The Country of the Pointed Firs by Sarah Orne Jewett. I read this with Dia from Novel Idea, and this is a book that is written from the perspective of a writer who is kind of like vacationing in Maine and trying to work on her book in Maine, and just some of the people that she encounters in this small town where she's staying. I actually had really high expectations for this book, and unfortunately they fell quite short of those expectations. I don't think that this was a particularly bad book, but I was expecting extremely beautiful nature writing, and I felt like there were snatches of that here and there, but honestly I felt like, at least for the first part of the book, the writing wasn't really anything to write home about, and it felt really episodic. Even towards like the end of the book, I felt like I didn't really know our narrator at all. I had no attachment to her whatsoever, and I felt like a lot of the interactions that she has with the townspeople are kind of like one-offs. And so as a result, you don't get as attached to the townspeople either. There's a couple people who have like recurring roles, but yeah, I was just kind of disappointed with it given what my expectations were going in. It's not a bad book, for sure. It just wasn't what I expected. I just felt like the entire time I was reading it, I could take it or leave it. I was not really invested in it and was kind of bored for some of the chapters. Not all of them. There was a couple chapters that I found to be like especially sweet, the stories that were being conveyed. So yeah, this was kind of like 3-ish stars for me. It wasn't a bad book, but it wasn't, I was hoping it was going to be a new favorite, and it just wasn't. I also read Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. This is my first of her works. I read this with my older sister, and I was blown away by the writing in this book. It's so beautiful. So this tells the story of a girl named Janie, and we start when she's very young, and we kind of follow her throughout relationships that are happening in her life. I had several of you tell me that this is like a favorite book of all time for you. So again, another book that I went into with really, really high expectations, and I did enjoy this book, but I feel like I didn't really, I don't know, like relate or connect to the main character as much as maybe some of you do. And so as a result, I didn't feel quite as invested in her as a character. Not that she was a bad character, but she's kind of portrayed as this independent woman who does whatever she wants, kind of thing. And people get upset at her for that because this is in a time period where like you need to get married and have babies or else. And especially Black women are also looked down on in this time period. And so there's all of that coming for it. So for her time period, she was probably quite an independent woman. But I found for the portrayal of how like independent she is, she felt like she was a very passive participant in her life most of the time. There's a couple of times where she made decisions that she was going to go off with this person or she was going to do that. But then when she was with that person, she just kind of passively stayed there and didn't do anything to change her situation while she was there. And so I don't know, like I have really mixed feelings about her as a main character. However, I feel like the writing was so gorgeous, so lush, so vivid. And I loved it so much that I would, in a heartbeat, read another book by this author, and I would reread this book. I know I'm giving you some critiques, but this is like a solid like 4-star book for me. Like, I did enjoy it overall, especially towards the end. Some the events that happen at the end were like much more exciting and interesting, and like there was more of a plot kind of like towards the end where you're like, oh my gosh, what is going to happen next? And so I really did enjoy this book despite the critiques that I'm giving you. But this is again a book that I was really hoping would be a new favorite, and it didn't quite reach that level, but her writing is a new favorite. The last classic that I finished for this month, I finished by the skin of my teeth on the last day of the month, and that is How Green Was My Valley by Richard Llewellyn. So this is a book I didn't really know anything about going into. I actually used a scavenger hunt to pick this book for my June TBR. I'll link that video in case you want to check it out, because you can use the prompts yourself if you want to choose a book for your next TBR. It was kind of a fun way to kind of like lead me to a book that I probably wouldn't have read anytime soon. And so this was a really interesting book, kind of told from the perspective of a boy who's growing up in a family of Welsh miners. And so there's some things that are happening. There's some like unrest that's happening in terms of unionization and the way that these miners are being treated and paid and all of that kind of stuff. So there's this underlying tension that's happening, but there's some really beautiful family relationships here, which was like my favorite part of the book. I loved Hugh's parents in this book. They were like my favorites for sure. But it's very much a coming of age story. And as a result, it has some elements of coming of age stories that I don't love. I like the idea, I think, of coming of age stories, and I like some of them a whole lot, but a lot of times an aspect of a coming of age story is like a sexual awakening, because that is, you know, that does happen when you reach adulthood through those adolescent years. That does happen. But I felt like a lot of the story focused on it in a way that I found a little uncomfortable. It wasn't like it was actually like written poorly. It wasn't like detailed. It wasn't smutty. It wasn't anything like that. It was just kind of like, okay, I'm kind of tired of hearing about this. Can we go back to the family relationships? Because that's where I was really invested. But again, this is another book that had really beautiful writing. I actually ended up, even though there's some tabs here, I listened to most of this on audio, but I did start it and finish it physically, so it was kind of a mishmash. Okay, next let's talk about some middle grade and YA, because I read one middle grade and one YA. So the middle grade that I read is Orion and the Door of Echoes by K.B. Hoyle. This is the sequel to Orion and the Starborn. You probably saw that I did a giveaway of Orion and the Starborn, and that was really fun to give away an autographed copy to one of you, because I love that book. I read it a couple of years ago, and it's put out by like an indie pub house, and so it was really fun to give some publicity to this author, to this book, to this series. And Owl's Nest Publishing, who's the indie pub house, so graciously sent me an arc of Orion and the Door of Echoes, so that way I could read it and review it before it was released. And I loved this book. I thought it was fantastic. I can't tell you too much about it because it kind of piggybacks off of book one, obviously, because it's a series. But the first book is about a boy who's living on Earth and kind of feels like he doesn't fit in. And there's a lot of things that are, I don't know, he just feels like he doesn't belong. And then there's actually like an assassination attempt on his life, and he finds out that the reason he feels like he doesn't belong is because he's not from Earth at all. He's actually from a set of planets that on Earth we think is Orion's belt, but it's actually 3 planets. And so he then travels there, goes to like a magical school to learn more about his abilities, about himself, why there are these attempts on his life, like why he's in danger, and just like all of these kinds of things. And so it has some really great friendships. It has some phenomenal world building. I thought that the prose is fantastic, especially for a middle grade book. A lot of modern middle grade books kind of have a utilitarian prose, and this does not. So yeah, totally lived up to the hype, and the fact that I had to wait, I think like 2.5 years for the sequel, it was worth the wait. I also read Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. This is one of the Hunger Games prequels, and it just came out this year. So this is Haymitch's story, if you've read the Hunger Games books. So there were things about it that you obviously know, because Haymitch is a mentor to Katniss and Peeta during the original Hunger Games trilogy, and he's a mentor because he was the winner of his games. And so you know, because he won his year of the Hunger Games, you know that everyone else is going to die. And so as a result, I felt like I didn't engage emotionally as much with the book as probably was intended, although I did really enjoy it. I was kind of like on the edge of my seat. I was like eating up the plot, and I was like, oh my gosh, what is going to happen next? But I did find myself kind of like holding back from attaching to a lot of characters because I just kind of knew what was going to happen. But it was really a fun read. I enjoyed it so much more than I enjoyed A Ballad of Songbird and Snakes, which was another Hunger Games prequel that came out a few years ago that was written about President Snow. And that one I was just kind of like very ambivalent about. But this one I enjoyed a lot more than that one. I did a whole vlog on this book, and I'll link that in case you want to watch it, because I actually updated at the end of every single chapter that I read. So if you've read it and you want to hear like my chapter by chapter thoughts, go check it out. It is obviously very spoilery, so if you've not read it, you might not want to watch it yet. Moving on to fantasy, I read 2 fantasies this month. So the first one was Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands, which I did listen to on audio. I've listened to both of the Emily Wilde books on audio so far, and they're great on audio. So this is kind of a cozy fantasy series. I guess I would call it that. I think that's kind of how it's typically classified, about this woman who is a professor studying fairies. And I feel like it gets compared often to the memoirs of Lady Trent, and it does have some similarities in feel and kind of like a plucky female protagonist who is not following the societal norms of her time. And yeah, so it definitely has that element, but I think that Emily Wilde has more humor and also kind of more suspense in a way. I don't think that that's really the right word, but a lot of the things that happen in the Lady Trent books have to do with some political underpinnings, and here it more has to do with like malevolent fae. So it feels a little bit more like life or death at times, and it feels more magical. And I just really like the relationships that are developing. I really love Emily and Wendell. I just think it's fun. I didn't like this book quite as much as the first book, and I can't put my finger on why. I just wasn't quite as invested. And I don't know why. I still had fun with it though. The other fantasy that I read is Ship of Destiny by Robin Hobb. And this is another one that I finished by the skin of my teeth because I finished it on the last day of the month. I have read the entire Live Ship Traders series with my friend Whitney, and that has been so fun. I love Whitney because she is my series buddy, because I am a chronic series starter and not a chronic series finisher. But anytime I read a series with Whitney, I always finish it because I have some accountability. So yeah, so we read this entire series together, and oh my gosh, I can't tell you much about this book, again, because it's the final book in a trilogy, but I'll just say that Robin Hobb's writing is just my favorite. She has like such a detailed, just like writing style, in that she really has like really excellent world building, but her character development is unmatched of any fantasy author I have ever read. She makes you just invest in characters, care about them. She can turn things on your head to make your favorite character your least favorite character, or your least favorite character now your favorite character, because the character, well, one of the characters that I disliked the most in the first book of this trilogy actually ended up being my favorite character of the entire trilogy because there was so much growth that happened. If you don't know anything about this series, this is part of Robin Hobb's like overarching realm of the Elderlings, which is like a 16-book series, but she split it up into different series. And so this particular series is very seafaring. It's about like trader families who have these ships who gain sentience and are able to talk and communicate and do these things. And so they travel and do trading and all that kind of stuff. But there's a very huge pirate element in this series as well. So it's incredible, but this is one that I do warn people to check trigger warnings on because it's far more gritty than a lot of books that I typically read. And in fact, in book 3, I had heads up from people that had read this before me, and then Whitney usually is ahead of me in reading, so she could warn me specific chapters of when something takes place, and I definitely skipped like paragraphs because I was like, oh, I don't think I can read this. But it was just like, it was so worth it for me. So wonderful. Okay, I'm going to talk about a couple of translated books. One's a manga, one's a regular book. So the first one is Attack on Titan, volume 17. We are so far into the series, Christy and I, that I can't tell you really much about this particular volume because it's literally like halfway through this manga series. But it's like kind of like horror / sci-fi where they live in this world where there are these like distorted humanoid creatures called Titans that eat humans, and they live in this walled city trying to protect themselves from the Titans. But there's like corruption happening in the government, and there's all these other things happening, and there's so many questions and so many mysteries, and like the plot just keeps you coming back for more. And I went through a period where we were reading a couple of them earlier this year, and it just kind of like, I was like, am I just like feeling burnt out on this? Because it felt like they were kind of a little bit of filler. But this volume and volume 16 also, both were like so exciting, so action-packed, and actually starting to give us reveals that I'm like wholeheartedly back on the Attack on Titan train. The other translated book that I read was The Dollar Gut Dream Department Store by Mi Lee, and this was such a fun book. I actually vlogged this for my Patreon. I do that once a month where a book has been recommended to me by one of them, and I will do like a full spoilery vlog with like all my thoughts while I'm reading it. So this was the one that I did for the month of June, and my gosh, this is such a fun book. I really enjoyed it. So this is kind of, how would you classify this? I guess kind of like fantasy, but it's cozy, but it also is kind of magical realism, because essentially what this story is about is it is about this dream department store where dreams are created and purchased, and it exists in the subconscious mind of humanity. So when you fall asleep, you can visit this store and purchase dreams to dream. And it's just so creative and innovative. It has so many things that are just like so inventive that I never would have thought of before. Things like the way that dreams are paid for, the currency is emotion. So the feelings that you feel when you wake up from these dreams are the payment to this department store. It goes over different types of dreams, like precognitive dreams and nightmares, and they talk about how flying dreams are always sold out because they are like the most popular, and they're like these famous dream producers, and they create these dreams, and they have almost these shows that are like the Oscars every year to determine who created the best dream of the year. And it has so much fun quirkiness to it that is just like really enjoyable and really cozy. But then there are moments of depth. So I already mentioned, for example, that there is like a chapter about nightmares here, but the nightmares are specifically introduced to people who are suffering stress or trauma over certain things that have happened to them. And so as they dream these dreams, they're able to process and move through. And so there's like a depth to this story as well, in addition to having lovable and quirky characters. So book 2 just came out, which is really fun. So this is a really, really great, like cozy translated Korean book if you are looking for something like that. Okay, lastly, moving on to nonfiction, which is my highest read category this month. Who is she? We don't know. I read 4 nonfictions this month. A lot of them I listened to on audio, some on my trip. Like I said, my husband and I like to listen to nonfiction when we are driving to New England because it ends up being anywhere from like probably like a 15 to 17-hour drive, just depending on traffic and stops and all of that kind of stuff. So we did get through quite a few audiobooks. The one that I did not listen to on audio that I read on my Kindle is Reclaiming Quiet by Sarah Clarkson. Guys, this is like my favorite book of the year so far. What an incredible book. So this book is all about kind of cultivating quiet pockets to connect with the Lord in a life that feels busy or overwhelming or, all of those kinds of things. And this is one of those books that is just like right book, right time for me. Like I needed this so much. This is a book that just like refreshed my soul. And if you've read any of Sarah Clarkson's books before, you'll know that she has just like stunning prose. Like the way that she writes is just so beautiful and poetic, but yet she delivers such powerful truths. And this is a book that is not only beautifully written, not only encouraging you in your walk with the Lord and encouraging you when you're going through a discouraging time, but it's also very, very practical because at the end of each chapter, not only is there a prayer that Sarah wrote out that is just like so beautiful and heartfelt, but there are also like reflection questions on like looking at your own life and trying to apply this and trying to make space for these things that are really important to live a life that even if your life is not actually quiet, is not actually like, physically quiet, because she has 4 small children. So her life is not quiet and her life is also busy. She is the wife of a vicar. And so there's lots of ministry opportunities as well. And as a pastor's wife who is also homeschooling her child and has like a million things going on, my life's not quiet either. And so to read a book that is also practical in helping you find quiet spaces and live a life of rest is like just so amazing. I highly recommend this book to anyone at all. And in fact, I'm kind of like going to do a low-key giveaway. So if you're finding yourself kind of like overwhelmed in your life and need to find a way to kind of quiet your soul and reconnect with the Lord, I would like you to comment if you would like a copy of this book. I would love to send it to you. So this video is coming out on a Tuesday, so I'll wait till the following Tuesday. I'll put the date up on the screen to choose a winner, so that way there's a week for people to watch it and comment on it. But just comment if you'd like a copy of this book. You do have to live within the United States because I need to be able to send you a copy via Amazon. So you also have to be okay with like emailing me or Instagram messaging me your address so I can send it to you. But that's really the only stipulations, is just to comment that you want it, because I want more people to read this book because it was just so powerful and beautiful and life-changing. And Sarah Clarkson is a reader. So if you love classic literature and just like literary stuff, like that's jam-packed within the pages of this really beautiful little book. The next book that I read, I actually listened to while I was doing some deep cleaning, and it's Decluttering at the Speed of Life. And I can't even remember who the author is. Dana something. It'll be on the screen. I love listening to minimalist or decluttering or cleaning books while I'm cleaning because it really motivates me. So that's why I listened to this one. I listened to it because a homeschool mom that I follow on Instagram mentioned that she uses this person's method for keeping her house clean. And so I went with this book, and this is not her cleaning book. So I want to listen to her cleaning book next. But this was just a really good practical book about decluttering. So if you're someone that you want to declutter and you want your stuff not to own you and be in your way all the time, but you don't think you have time to like declutter, this is such a practical book of like breaking it down and being like, hey, set a timer and do this. And the steps are the same for every area. She walks through every room of your house. And I really liked it on audio because she read her own book. And I love it when authors read their own books. And she has a very conversational tone. I feel like maybe I wouldn't like the conversational tone quite as much if I was reading it physically. I think it really comes across so well on audio because it just feels like someone's just talking to you about it, like a friend chatting with you about it. So I really, really enjoyed it on audio, but I'm sure it's great physically as well. I do feel like it got a little bit repetitive, but I think that was kind of the point because she was trying to like drill into your brain these steps. And so every room kind of has the same kind of thing. And so as a result, it gets a little repetitive, but I did really enjoy it. The two audiobooks that we finished on our trip, where there's one that we got like over halfway through that I finished at the beginning of July, so that will be in July's wrap up. But the first one we finished is The Pioneers by David McCullough. I had tried to read this book a couple of years ago and kind of DNF'd it halfway through. And my husband had read it before, but he'd been wanting to reread it. He is a huge David McCullough fan, and I see why. This is, I think, my third David McCullough. But I enjoyed this book. It was very informative about kind of like the first part of like westward expansion. But there are things I didn't like about it. I felt like it was really scattered. He kind of includes all these details from all these people, and it takes you a while to figure out who's actually important to focus on, because there ends up being about 5 men that really play a very vital role, but you don't really know who, and you have kind of like these side tangents. Like he's got this whole section towards the end about Aaron Burr after he, shoots Alexander Hamilton in a duel, and kind of like some of his like rebellion and uprising against Thomas Jefferson. And so like then that plays a role in kind of like he goes to like this town that is founded by these pioneers and stuff. But like it felt like, I don't know, like it felt like, okay, that like that's interesting, but I don't know that that really needs to be there. Like there were things that it just felt like it was kind of like all over the place. So as a result, I've also read his biography of Teddy Roosevelt, and I loved that. And so I'm kind of feeling like maybe I like his books that are biographies more than his books that are about like a general topic, because last year we listened to a book about Americans visiting Paris, and I did not like that book at all. It was like all over the place, and I didn't care about anything. Maybe it's also because I didn't care about the subject matter either. But in this case, I was really interested about the pioneers. But when I also think of the pioneers, I think about people traveling west to like Kansas and stuff. And this is like the very first pioneers who traveled to Ohio. And I wish it had kind of like continued into like westward expansion further west. And it really didn't. I also felt like it wasn't very balanced. And I know that this is a story that is about the pioneers, but I felt like it wasn't very balanced in terms of what was happening to and going on with the Native Americans that are being pushed out of their land at the same time. I felt like it was entirely like villainizing them without giving their perspective at all. And so I felt like this was like, okay. The other one is Unbroken by Laura Hillenbrand, I think. Again, be up on the screen. This is a biography of, I'm not going to remember his last name, Louis Zambarino, I think. And I knew nothing about him. I just had heard people say that they loved this book. I actually own this book physically, and I hadn't gotten to it yet. And the reason that we chose this audiobook is because we love, oh my gosh, names are so hard for me today. Edward Herman, is that his name? The grandfather from Gilmore Girls. He has done a lot of nonfiction audiobook narration, and he's phenomenal. So that is actually why we chose this book, is because of that. And I just loved this story. So this is a story that is about a man who becomes an Olympic runner. And we start with his childhood. We were cracking up because he was an absolute hellion of a child. Like, my gosh, like a nightmare child. But it's funny because it's not my child. The anecdotes are so over the top that you're like, how is this even real? How is there really a child like this? So we were kind of laughing at that at the beginning. And then it kind of follows how he channels his misbehavior into running and channels all his energy into that. Then World War II happens, and he becomes a pilot, and his plane is shot down. And so he's trying to survive in this raft with 2 other men from his plane. And then he actually ends up in a POW camp in Japan. And so it follows all of that. And then it follows after the war and kind of like his processing and all of that kind of stuff. And it takes such a beautifully redemptive turn that I wasn't expecting because I didn't know anything about his life. So I don't want to say anything about that in case in case you don't know anything about his life either. But this was just so phenomenal. Like, there were moments when I was like so horrified at the things that were happening to him. And then the ending made me cry. Like, it just, like, this book had it all for me. I laughed, I cried, it moved me, Bob. Okay, so those are the books, and I said I was gonna say where I put them when I went through, and I forgot. So I'm gonna tell you now. Here's my bingo board. So I put Country of the Pointed Firs in a book that was set in the summertime. Their Eyes Were Watching God was a new to me author. How Green Was My Valley was a classic. Orion and the Door of Echoes was a book in a series. Sunrise on the Reaping was a popular book. Ship of Destiny was an ocean setting. Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands I put in the brain candy space. I did not put Attack on Titan anywhere. I could have put it somewhere, but I didn't. I'll explain that in just a minute. Dollar Gut Dream Department Store was a friend recommendation. Reclaiming Quiet was a refreshing book. Decluttering at the Speed of Life, I didn't put in a space. The Pioneers I put for vacation or travel. It's not vacation, but there was a lot of traveling. And then Unbroken is a one-word title. So I had two books that I didn't put anywhere on the bingo board. I could have put one of them in a nonfiction space. I could have put one of them in a library book space, but I didn't. And the reason that I didn't is because, yes, I could have taken up all those spaces in June, but I know that I'm going to be reading a nonfiction and then I'm going to be reading a library book in the month of July. And I don't want to finish July. I feel like I have no spaces that I've contributed to the bingo board because I took it all up in June. So I purposely did that only because I'm like, okay, I want to feel like I'm making progress each month. So it was kind of for a silly reason that I didn't put those on the bingo board. Anyway, those are all the books that I read in the month of June. I would love to hear your thoughts. If you've read any of the books that I read this month, I would love to chat with you about that in the comments. And I would love to hear, what have you been reading in the month of June? What was your favorite book? I would have a hard time choosing a favorite book. Actually, no, I wouldn't. It would be Reclaiming Quiet, but Unbroken and Ship of Destiny are right up there as well. Those were definitely my top 3. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.